This might be one of the most misleading maps you'll ever see, because Alaska looks like it's sitting at the edge of America. But look at where it actually is. Russia is just across the Bering Strait. The Arctic Ocean is directly north, and the Pacific opens up to the south. At its narrowest, the Bering Strait is only about 51 miles wide. And here's the crazy part. The United States and Russia are literally separated by just a few miles between the two Diomede Islands. So why is this frozen corner of America suddenly getting so much attention? Because the Arctic is changing. And Alaska sits right at the center of that change. For decades, Alaska was already important. During the Cold War, its location made it a major part of America's northern defense. But now, the Arctic itself is changing. NOAA reports that the Arctic has been warming at more than twice the global rate since 2006, while sea ice has become younger and thinner. That doesn't mean the Arctic is suddenly becoming an easy highway. Far from it. It's still one of the harshest environments on Earth, but less ice and changing conditions are making more human activity possible. And that has attracted something the Arctic hasn't seen at this scale in decades. Competition, military competition, shipping competition, and competition over resources, and Alaska is sitting right in the middle of it. And this is where Alaska's location becomes a military advantage. Look at Alaska from a globe instead of a flat map. It sits incredibly close to Russia. The Russian mainland is less than 60 miles from Alaska at the narrowest point, and the Bering Strait connects the Pacific and Arctic Oceans. That makes the region strategically important for monitoring movement between the Pacific and Arctic. The Pentagon actually describes the Arctic as critical to the defense of the United States homeland. And it isn't just because of geography. Alaska contains major military infrastructure. Take Fort Greely. This remote military installation is part of America's ground-based mid-course defense system. Its mission includes defending against intercontinental ballistic missiles. So when you look at Alaska, you're not just looking at wilderness, you're looking at one of America's northern defense nodes. But something happened in 2024 that showed why this geography matters again. In July 2024, Russian and Chinese military aircraft conducted a joint bomber patrol near Alaska. The aircraft entered the Alaska Air Defense Identification Zone, or ADIZ. Important distinction. An ADIZ is not the same thing as U.S. sovereign airspace. The aircraft were detected and intercepted by U.S. and Canadian fighters. But the incident was significant because it demonstrated growing military cooperation between Russia and China in the region. The Pentagon has specifically highlighted increasing Russian-Chinese cooperation in the Arctic. And that changes the strategic calculation because China isn't an Arctic country. Russia is. And Russia has the largest Arctic territory and one of the strongest military presences in the region. China, meanwhile, has been increasing its economic, scientific, and military interest in the Arctic. So Alaska isn't just watching Russia anymore. It's watching a much bigger geopolitical game develop around the Arctic. And if you're enjoying seeing how geography connects to the world's biggest power struggles, stick around. Because Alaska's most surprising advantage isn't above the ground, it's underneath it. For centuries, ice made the Arctic one of the hardest places on Earth to navigate. That is changing, not because the Arctic has become easy, but because the amount and thickness of sea ice have declined. NOAA says Arctic sea ice is now younger and thinner than in previous decades, while declining ice is allowing more maritime activity. And that matters because the Arctic contains potential shortcuts between the world's major oceans. There are several Arctic routes. The Northern Sea Route runs along Russia's northern coast. The Northwest Passage runs through the Canadian Arctic and along the northern Canadian and Alaskan region. And the Bering Strait connects the Pacific and Arctic. That makes the Bering Strait extremely important. It is essentially one of the gateways between the Pacific and Arctic, and shipping activity is already increasing in the broader Arctic region. But here's where we need to be careful. This does not mean the Arctic is about to replace the Suez Canal. Arctic shipping is difficult. Ice remains a major problem. Weather can be extreme. Infrastructure is limited. And specialized ships and icebreakers may be required. Congressional Research Service analysis specifically warns that the growth of Arctic shipping may be slower than some headlines suggest. So the real story isn't the Arctic is becoming the world's new highway. It's the Arctic is becoming a new strategic option, and that option becomes more valuable when global trade routes are disrupted. And then there's what lies beneath Alaska. Literally, resources. Alaska is already famous for oil, natural gas, gold, and fisheries. But there's another category becoming increasingly important: critical minerals. These are materials used across modern technology, energy systems, and defense industries. And Alaska has an extraordinary geological advantage. According to the U.S. Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, 49 of America's 50 federally designated critical minerals are found in significant quantities in Alaska. That's a huge number. But there's an important caveat. Finding a mineral in Alaska doesn't automatically mean it can be mined economically. Many deposits are in remote areas. Infrastructure can be expensive. Environmental regulations matter. And extracting a mineral is only one step in a much larger supply chain. Still, the strategic potential is enormous. Think about modern technology, advanced electronics, batteries, energy systems, aerospace, defense equipment. All depend on complicated global supply chains, and governments increasingly want secure access to materials that are strategically important. That gives Alaska another advantage, not just its location, but what's beneath it. And when you combine those resources with Alaska's location, the picture gets much bigger because Alaska is simultaneously a military position, an Arctic gateway, and a resource-rich territory. But there's one wild card that could change the entire equation: climate change. The Arctic isn't warming uniformly everywhere, but the overall trend is unmistakable. NOAA 2025 Arctic Report Card says the Arctic experienced its warmest water year on record from October 2024 through September 2025. And March 2025 recorded the lowest Arctic winter maximum sea ice extent in the satellite record. That has consequences far beyond melting ice. It affects shipping, military operations, coastal infrastructure, fisheries, permafrost, and resource development. But here's the paradox. Less ice can mean greater access, while simultaneously making Arctic operations more difficult. Melting permafrost can damage infrastructure, changing coastlines can threaten communities, and extreme weather can make navigation dangerous. So climate change isn't simply making the Arctic more valuable, it's making the Arctic more unpredictable. Now put everything together. Military. Alaska sits beside Russia and the Bering Strait. Shipping. The changing Arctic is creating more opportunities for maritime access. Resources. Alaska contains enormous quantities of strategically important minerals and other natural resources, and all three lead back to one thing: geography. The funny thing is, Alaska itself hasn't changed position. The Bering Strait hasn't moved. Russia hasn't moved. The Pacific hasn't moved. Our perception of the map has changed. For decades, the Arctic was treated as a remote, frozen frontier. Now it's increasingly being viewed as a region where economics, security, climate, and geopolitics collide. And Alaska happens to be right at the intersection. So the next time you see Alaska on a map, don't just think America's frozen state. Zoom out. Russia is right across the Bering Strait. The Arctic stretches north. The Pacific opens south. Canada connects Alaska to the rest of North America. And beneath Alaska are resources that could become increasingly important to the global economy. That's why Alaska matters. Not because it suddenly became important, but because the world has started paying much more attention to what its geography has always meant. Alaska sits at the intersection of military power, Arctic access, and strategic resources. And as the Arctic changes, that intersection could become one of the most important geographic positions on Earth. So here's the question. Do you think the Arctic will become the next major arena of global competition, or will the extreme environment keep it too difficult to dominate? Tell me your answer in the comments. And subscribe for more fascinating maps, geography, and stories hiding in plain sight.